At the end of this week, there will be a meeting between the advisors to the leaders of the EU and Ukraine. They will be discussing the peace plan specifically. According to President Volodymyr Zelenskyy, this is not a plan to end the war, because a complete ceasefire is needed for that. However, this is a concept for ending Russian aggression and a document from which diplomacy actually begins. We are now bringing in our next guest, Stanislav Zhelikhovsky. He is a candidate of political sciences and a corresponding member of the Ukrainian Academy of Geopolitics and Geostrategy. Greetings to you, Mr. Stanislav.
Good afternoon.
Regarding this peace plan, the official document and the synergy that the head of the president's office has mentioned between Ukraine, the European Union, and the United States, at what specific stage are we currently in at this point in achieving this important synergy?
Indeed, right now we see that there is a lot of talk about developing a peace plan for Ukraine. And already one such draft, or perhaps the only draft of such a plan, has appeared in the media. And this is a 12-point plan that, let's say, outlines the most important aspects, including those concerning the line of demarcation, the ceasefire, security guarantees, and other issues. Overall, it's an interesting document, but if you really look closely at its provisions, it's quite underdeveloped. It still needs more specifics and a clearer vision of how this plan could actually be implemented in practice. After all, yes, we can say that work on this is ongoing, and in principle, that's the right approach, because perhaps we need to show that Ukraine and our partners are ready, let's say, to negotiate a cessation of hostilities in Ukraine. But in my opinion, the Russian Federation is far from supporting all of this. We have to truly understand and recognize that without receiving any kind of feedback, response, or communication from the other side, it will be extremely difficult, if not nearly impossible, to work things out, resolve issues, or come to any sort of agreement. The steps and actions that can actually be implemented, carried out, or put into practice in real-life situations are crucial. We must clearly realize that the Russian Federation is currently not going to stop the hostilities. It is unlikely to accept any such proposals, and instead, it will offer its own vision. The end of hostilities, and we all perfectly understand what is meant by that. And regarding synergy, obviously it is necessary to develop various options for how to stop the hostilities. If we are talking about ourselves and our allies, it should be done together, it should be done synchronously, because then we will see a unified direction of movement in this regard, and that is important. I would really like to see more details regarding security guarantees, because later on with this document, this draft version, this issue still hasn't been properly worked out, and it seems to me that more needs to be done here to look for those options that would be as authentic and realistic as possible for the period after the end of hostilities. It seems to me that this is exactly what will be emphasized during the next meetings, particularly in the format of the Coalition of the Willing, and some kind of greater specificity if we are talking about these proposals for a peaceful settlement.
And in fact, these fragments of the document that we are commenting on now are not official statements, rather they are leaks to the media from, obviously, interested parties. In your opinion, do those interested parties who leaked these fragments have good intentions? They dump raw fragments of the document, excuse me for the expression, out into the public. Doesn't this actually do harm instead to the development process?
Well, yes, obviously. We have to understand that now basically everyone is reading this document, whatever has appeared. We don't know if it's genuine. Absolutely. Yes, we need to understand that as well. And we also need to realize that even if this is a leak, it could actually be, let's say, a deliberate move to test our reaction, our assessments, and so on. But we also can't rule out that this could be some kind of imitation, if you will, of a peace plan. In other words, it might not correspond to reality at all. Of course, some points there might coincide. But it's more like a distraction, so to speak, or to confuse the Russian Federation itself. Maybe, let's say, so that they react to it in some way now, and so that we hear some new statements from their side and understand the true intentions of the Kremlin at this stage. But yes, we have to understand that there are people who can sell information, who can leak it, and so on. Well, obviously, this can harm the process as a whole. That's why I think that, after all, there may be some alternatives. I'm not saying these are alternatives from certain individual countries, but rather, for example, from a coalition of the willing, so to speak, to develop other versions of those peace plans that could, let's say, be implemented in the future. Well, these are just thoughts. We, of course, can't say for sure right now how everything is actually happening. We would like to receive more official and reliable information, but understanding that at the moment, at this time, it's best not to disclose certain intentions or developments. It's probably better for things to remain confidential for a while. Kept secret, confidential, so that this information does not become public. And only later, when there is some kind of meeting or some other format where it can be made public, then I would like us to see a more or less final version. So I think we just need to keep following the developments. Yes, of course, we analyze information, even the kind that might appear as a fake, but nevertheless. But let's hope that we will still be able to, we as a state, Ukraine and our partners, to work out that option. Those steps toward ending the war that could be as realistic and as effective as possible. And then time will tell. A bit more
about the real intentions of the Kremlin. Ukraine does not recommend that journalists trust Putin or visit Pokrovsk and Kupiansk. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs reminded that Moscow had already broken its own promises during the battles for Ilovaisk. Here is a quote.
I do not recommend that journalists trust any of Putin's proposals regarding corridors in the combat zone. I have seen with my own eyes how such proposals end. August 29, 2014 in Ilovaisk. Putin only wants to prolong the war. He has never kept his promises about a ceasefire. I also remind all media outlets that any visits to territory occupied by Russia without Ukraine's permission are a violation of our legislation and international law. They will have long-term reputational and legal consequences. Georgi Tiki, spokesperson for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine.
Let me remind you, the day before, Putin ordered the Russian Ministry of Defense to allow foreign journalists, including Ukrainian ones, into Pokrovsk, Mirnograd and Kupiansk, so that they could supposedly see the encirclement of Ukrainian soldiers in these cities. The Russian ruler claimed that, allegedly, who is ready to cease hostilities for 5 to 6 hours so that journalists can visit these settlements. Mr. Stanislav here has been reading analytics from Western media, including columnists from the New York Times. They, let's say, do provide such coverage. For reflection, such an idea is an attempt to confuse the White House itself to present themselves as peaceful, as peace initiators. But, well, in reality, it doesn't look very convincing. How do you analyze this?
As soon as this information appeared that the Russian dictator Vladimir Putin might allow foreign journalists to visit combat zones, I was very much, let's say, both surprised and not surprised at the same time. Well, of course, there are hidden signals coming from the Russian dictator, from the leadership of the aggressor country. It's very good that the state, Ukraine, and the Ministry of Justice responded to such information promptly, because this is definitely a dangerous situation. And indeed, unfortunately, there have been such incidents, such bitter experiences when Russia was able to carry out various violations, especially during active hostilities. And regarding other issues, I want to remind you that there were times when OSCE representatives and others also came under Russian shelling. In other words, for Russia, there are no red lines or anything like that. Therefore, obviously, I do not rule out that a provocation could have taken place here, and then accusations could have followed as well from Moscow, directed at Ukraine, claiming that supposedly Ukraine failed to ensure the safety of journalists on its territory. And by the way, it's not up to Putin to dictate who can move around or visit places, especially when it concerns our own country. And here, by the way, there's a very subtle subtext, it seems to me, that Putin already wants to show as if this is already his land, and he can issue some orders, some directives about who is allowed to be there and who is not. So we need to understand this as well. This is also an element of hybrid warfare, and in fact part of the full-scale aggression being carried out by the Russian Federation. We hope that our partners won't fall for things like this, just more posts from the Russian tyrant, and that foreign journalists won't, let's say, try to get accreditation to visit these places. By the way, this could also harm the front lines of combat and other things as well. And Russia could use this once again for its own propaganda. In other words, there are a lot of risks. So, in my opinion, overall, this Putin's statement should be ignored as much as possible or responded to in the way Ukraine did through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So it seems to me that this is, let's say, once again, either another of Putin's tricks, another provocation, or just another information dump, and so on. We must clearly and thoroughly understand that the enemy is insidious, the enemy is cunning, and the enemy, let's say, is focused and determined on achieving certain objectives by any means necessary. Therefore, we need to be as prepared as possible for all of this and keep our finger firmly on the pulse, he said with Taurus. We must not allow ourselves to be manipulated because we know that there is a war going on right now. It is not only a fight for Ukraine's survival, but also for the existence of the entire free world, for the world order that exists. For many years now, these are my considered thoughts on this particular issue. Well, we definitely need to stay vigilant, remain attentive, and respond appropriately to everything that the Russian Federation proposes.
Mr. Stanislav, let's take a look at what will be happening on the other side of the Atlantic. The meeting between Donald Trump and Viktor Orban will take place next Friday, as reported by the office of the Hungarian Prime Minister. It is noted that negotiations on a number of issues have been ongoing between Budapest and Washington for quite some time. The purpose of the visit is to reach all the necessary agreements. This concerns cooperation in the energy, military, economic and financial sectors. One of the pressing issues will likely be Hungary's purchase of Russian energy resources. Officials also plan to discuss ways to achieve peace in Ukraine. In your opinion, Mr. Stanislav, from what I have just listed and before the Hungarian Prime Minister's apparatus, which of these could yield concrete results? And in fact, the very format of the meeting, considering the familiarity shown by the American president towards the Hungarian Prime Minister, he never calls him Mr. Orban, but always Viktor. Viktor, Viktor, my favorite Viktor, and so on and so forth. How could this meeting develop and what consequences might there be? First and foremost, I'm interested in the energy consequences, considering the role of Russian energy resources for Budapest. And also these latest so-called paths to peace in Ukraine. These two...
Yes, that's true as well. By the way, if you look at the list of issues that might be raised by the parties, specifically Viktor Orban and Donald Trump during this meeting, I would highlight the energy component and the process of so-called regulation. Energy obviously means first and foremost oil for Hungary. And I think the Hungarian Prime Minister will try to convince the American leader that it's worth continuing to buy Russian oil because Hungary is extremely dependent on this resource. And the prices, let's say, are more or less at a level that is acceptable for Hungary. But here, it's not at all a given or guaranteed that Trump will actually agree to this proposal because, on the contrary, he consistently and repeatedly calls, let's say, for the United States to get rid of or eliminate its dependence on Russian energy resources. Therefore, let's say, it's not entirely out of the question or beyond the realm of possibility that Trump will at some point propose or suggest some alternative options or solutions, which could potentially change the current situation or approach. To supply their own raw materials, oil, gas, and liquefied gas as well. And they can do this, for example, through the territory of Croatia, if they deliver it there by various means by sea. But again, the question of price arises because for Orban, it is important that the prices are acceptable, especially considering that Hungary is gradually entering an election race within the country. Not only to maintain, but also to strengthen his electoral positions, because now, according to the polls, there are risks that Orban and his political party, Fidesz, could lose the levers of power in Hungary. If we are talking about a peaceful settlement, then I think that the Hungarian Prime Minister, of course, will raise the issue of holding a Trump-Putin summit on Hungarian territory. This is also important, first and foremost, for political reasons, in order to strengthen his own position. And in this way, Orban wants to show that he can contribute to a peaceful settlement and that Hungary can play the role of a bridge between the West and the East, or with Russia, let's say. So, in fact, these will be the main topics, although, of course, the issue of bilateral cooperation will also be raised. There is a lot of room for activity here, and of course, Viktor Orban will try to flatter as much as possible. to the American leader, and let's put it this way, emphasize his role, by the way, in the peace process rather than the role of Europe, which Orban constantly criticizes.
Mr. Stanislav, thank you. Stanislav Zhelikhovsky is a candidate of political sciences and a corresponding member of the Ukrainian Academy of Geopolitics and Geostrategy.